This is the Adoptive Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast Birth Mother's Day episode. So as of this episode coming out, Birth Mother's Day is this coming Saturday, but we are celebrating now. And I'm super excited about it. Where, usually for Birth Mother's Day, I do like a really sweet episode with a good story. And, this has a good story, but I'm just going to take this opportunity to shed light on a really hard issue. So my first interview is going to be with Josh Bryant. So he's an attorney, an adoption ethicist, and adoption reform advocate in Northwest Arkansas. He spent several years practicing family law, in which he did adoptions on behalf of adoptive parents. And he's also an adoptive father of 2 children. So he's experienced adoption from that perspective as well. And he's going to talk to us about this really hard issue that I'm alluding to. And, partially to tell you guys about this and partially to plug my email list, I'm going to read you something that I wrote for my email subscribers. And you can subscribe at theadoptivemompodcast.com/email. You're going to get a new just little note from me every Monday morning. You're going to have links to the episode. And I usually share stuff in there that I don't really share anywhere else, including some photos that I don't share on social media or whatever else. But this is something I wrote for that. So in this episode, we're celebrating Birth Mother's Day by shedding some light on a really hard issue, how birth mamas can often be extremely taken advantage of, even to the point where it is legally becoming a human trafficking issue. This, unfortunately, isn't even all that rare. Low-income women are being directly targeted when they become pregnant. Unethical agencies and adoption attorneys have employees who will offer under-the-table cash for babies without ensuring that these birth moms know their rights. We've seen women who don't speak good English be misinformed that they are entering an open adoption, and then after they sign the papers, they find out that they can never see their child again. We're seeing women who are being told that they'll be arrested if they change their mind and decide to parent. We've seen pregnant women flown illegally into the country to give birth and adopt out their child, and then stranded without a passport or a visa or any help getting back to their home and their families. It's sickening, and it's happening right under our noses. And much like how the sex trafficking industry is only responding to supply and demand, adoptions are too. When people indulge in coerced sexual activity, they may think they are not doing anything wrong since they're simply, quote, paying money for a service rendered. We know, though, that if they weren't buying, no one would be selling. In adoptions, this responsibility is on us, the adoptive parents. When we turn a blind eye to red flags in our adoptions, we're participating in this supply and demand. It's on us to ensure that our adoptions are ethical and that our children's birth mamas are being taken care of in the process. Let's spread the word and be sure to honor our birth moms this Saturday with letters, gifts, photos, prayers, thoughts, kind words about them to our children, or whatever works best for your family. Let's show our children that we aren't ashamed or embarrassed or bitter about such an important part of who they are biologically. Let's do better, mamas. So, like I said, that's something I wrote for my email list, and I just want that to be the transition into my interview with Josh. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. And this is our birth mom episode. I know I said that in the intro, but I'm pretty excited about just the guests that we have on this episode. And we're going to be talking about some pretty hard topics, but some really important ones that us as an adoptive moms that we need to know about, that we need to be aware about. And those are sometimes hard pills to swallow. And so I'm excited about this, but just know that everything we talk about in this episode is really to support the people who brought our children life. And that's just so important. But on that note, I want to welcome my guest today. So hi, Josh. How's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited about, Birth Mother's Day and Mother's Day because that means I get a break, right? That's how that works.
That's awesome. Yep.
Yeah. But just take a second and tell us about your family and who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Josh Bryant. I'm an attorney in Northwest Arkansas. I do a little bit of everything, but also had a family practice for several years, in which I represented usually people doing step parent adoption, so usually representing the step parents, but did several adoptions that way. Also an adoptive father. I've adopted 2 children in our family. My wife's name is Megan, and so yeah, we're raising our family with 2 adopted kiddos and a biological kid right here in Northwest Arkansas.
That's awesome. And how old are your adopted kids and bio kid?
So our biological son, he is 9, and then our daughter we adopted. She is 6 now, and then we have a 2-year-old that we've also adopted.
Okay, so they're nice and spread out. You're not going fully crazy, but
Yeah. We did the college math to make sure we only had 1 in college at a time, hopefully. So.
Oh man, we'll have 3 in college at the same time. So
there you go.
I'm quite jealous of that. That's going to be real expensive. So, and also, your children are both Marshallese, correct?
Yes, they are.
And so that, I know that a lot of what you do with this bill that has recently passed, and just the work that you do advocating for birth moms, has a lot to do with Marshallese women and how they've been mistreated in the past. But it goes for everyone too, right? Not just that people group.
Sure. Yeah. It's most visible within the Marshallese community. There's been a lot more press and a lot more talk about the abuses within the Marshallese community. But we've also, through the course of passing this bill and getting just more evidence of things that are going on that necessitated some legislative change, we've come across problems in a whole lot of ethnic communities, including just Caucasian communities, where there have been abuses going on. And as we've also discovered, it's not just happening in Arkansas, it's happening all over the country. And so there's a lot of reform that needs to happen, and hopefully we can continue working just to get that reform done in Arkansas, and then maybe some other states will catch on. So
absolutely. And I want to get into all of that. So, I mean, listeners, that's a little bit of a teaser for you, but Josh, I would love for you to start just at the beginning and tell us why and how this became a passion for you. Where did you see the need at first?
So when we adopted our daughter, there were a couple of red flags, but just things that I said, you know what, I'm just not going to, there's probably nothing, so I'm just going to let it slide. I'm not going to make an issue of this. And then several years later, there was an article that came out that talked about some abuses that were happening within the Marshallese community. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, that's just a one-off. That was one case that went bad, and you're never going to have 100% perfection. So, that's probably just one case. And so then we adopted our son. And again, everything seemed to be legit at the time. And then shortly after we adopted our son is when we really started hearing a lot of talk about some of the problems that were going on in Marshallese adoptions. And so the more I started researching it, the more I learned about some of the abuses, to the extent that at one point it just became clear that I needed to do something about it. And so we started talking to people and talking publicly about needing some adoption reform. And it was strange because our son's birth mother reached out to us and she said, well, I just want to say thanks for talking about this. This is an issue that needs to be discussed. And it was a little bit out of character for her. And so I asked her just some questions about her circumstances at the time that she decided that she was going to place a child up for adoption. And it was then that we learned that the story that we were told as adoptive parents was not what actually happened, and that we were kind of duped into adopting. And, we're had kind of a mixed bag of emotions there when you love your son and are glad that he's part of your family, but to learn that the circumstances of that adoption were shady at best. Just one of those things that kind of created just like I said, a mixed bag of emotions for that circumstance. So fueled the passion even more at that point. We were already working on legislation by that point, but that certainly fueled a passion that said, this has got to stop. We've got to do something about it. We've got to get some legislation passed.
Absolutely. And so you worked with some other people, including people at Shared Beginnings, just to really fine tune this and figure out where the need actually was, and how this bill could help, what legally could be done to help, and what was, something that just needed to change within the adoptive community. And so what were some of those big red flags? What were some of the just really bad things that are happening? I know that we throw around words like human trafficking, and those seem extreme, but that's exactly what's going on, right?
To a large degree, yes. I mean, there are probably a lot of cases in which it's not human trafficking, in which the conversation about an adoption is initiated by a biological family. But there are also a lot of cases in which those conversations are initiated by somebody unrelated to the biological family, in terms of actually going out and soliciting a pregnant woman and offering cash to go to a lawyer's office and place a child up for adoption, or even go to an agency and place a child up for adoption. And the person who makes that offer obviously always has some sort of benefit, something to gain from that. And so, that's probably the first step in a process in which an adoption goes very unethically from that point forward. If that's the way the adoption starts, it's really not a great way that it's going to end for the biological family.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put that too.
Yeah.
There's obviously just so much going on there, and so like I said, just what are some of those red flags of what you see? So if I'm an adoptive mom and I'm entering what I think is an ethical adoption, what are some of the things that I need to be looking for that tell me that it's not?
So if you're going through a private attorney to do the adoption as opposed to an agency or through the Department of Human Services, whatever your state equivalent is, one of the things you need to look out for is whether or not there are two attorneys involved in this case. When there's one attorney kind of representing both sides, that generates a conflict of interests. And it's going to be questionable where that attorney's loyalties lie. Do they lie with you as the adoptive parents who are paying the bill and who will go to court with this attorney in order to finalize the adoption? Or do they lie with the biological mother? And we've seen it go both ways, especially when a mother kind of gets hooked and becomes dependent on these payments from adoptive families through these attorneys. They'll place 3, 4, 5 children up for adoption over the course of 4, 5, 6 years. And so when that happens, these attorneys, and I don't mean to sound crass, but these attorneys see these biological women as a supply chain oftentimes. You've got different sets of adoptive parents for every one of these kids. So from the attorney's perspective, that adoptive family may bring me $10,000, but this biological mother is bringing me 60 or 70 or 80. And so now we're in a position where obviously this attorney's loyalties are going to lean more towards this biological mother, and that's going to create problems for the adoptive family, that they really don't have somebody looking out for their best interests. At the same time, that person's really not looking out for the biological mother's best interest either. They're looking out for their own. And so you're left in a situation where, regardless of the situation, the biological mother just doesn't have a voice in the process. This may not have been a voluntary choice. If she wants to change her mind and parent her child, she doesn't have anybody to speak up for her and say, here's what we're going to do to make that happen. And so that's probably the first thing that I would look for. I'd want to know how the mother came to this position or this point of wanting to make an adoption plan, but then make sure that that mother, and if there's a father in the picture, that father has a voice in this whole process.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important aspect that is often overlooked, because I think that, as someone who, we didn't do private adoption, we went through the foster care system. And so in my mind, I obviously understand it's not an easy transaction. That's not what I'm saying. But I just mean it's like, it seems like it could be simple where you pay a bill and then at the end of the time, you have your baby and you can support your birth mom and whatever else. But what are the things that are supposed to be happening when you pay your attorney that money?
Well, so you're paying that attorney to represent you. Mm-hmm. Ultimately that's your attorney. That's not her attorney. And the attorneys that I'm familiar with, that I've kind of talked to, that their practice is not the most ethical in the world, in my opinion. The ones that I've talked to make their biological mom sign a document that says, you understand, I'm not your lawyer. I don't represent you in this. And so that's probably the number one area where they start to get into trouble. Mm-hmm. And so What the attorney should be doing, though, as far as doing everything they can to help that biological mother, there needs to be somebody who can help that biological mother go to the doctor and make sure that those doctor bills are paid. We've seen biological mothers come out on the other end of an adoption with a debt to a hospital or to a doctor's office that should have been taken care of through the adoption process. And so that obviously sets them up for future failure if they are in a position where they just can't afford that, $15,000, $20,000 worth of debt. So that needs to be taking place. So we need to make sure that her bills that are reasonably related to the adoption or to the pregnancy are paid, as long as state law allows that. And so, obviously we've got to have a place to live for the health of the child. We've got to be able to drive to work and to the doctor's offices, need lights on, need heat and air, need food on the table, need prenatal care. All of those things, we would hope that our attorneys at that point are taking care of those things. We're finding out that that's just not necessarily the case all the time.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of enters this bill that we're talking about, or just really your initiative in general. So, I mean, I don't want to limit it just to the scope of the legislation that's recently passed, but more just your advocacy in general. So what has that looked like, and what led us to the place of getting this bill passed?
So, I worked with a couple of people who are intimately involved with Shared Beginnings. We sat down and kind of talked through the necessity of seeing some systematic change in how adoptions are done. And we kind of started brainstorming and putting some ideas together. And then a legislator came out with a proposed fix to the adoption problem, because it was certainly becoming more and more of an issue. But it was a very narrowly tailored solution, and it was one that probably wouldn't have withstood constitutional scrutiny. It basically would have said that the Marshallese government has to sign off on any Marshallese adoption in the state of Arkansas, and you can't single out an ethnicity in law, and so it probably wouldn't have held up under judicial scrutiny. But so we met with that legislator, and then it just kind of blossomed from there. Met with other legislators, met with other adoption practitioners, met with judges who hear a lot of adoptions, just kind of talked through what the biggest concerns were, and brainstormed what some systematic changes could be that would fix those problems. And we've met with federal law enforcement and just a wide variety of people that could be stakeholders in this legislation, and started putting it together. And it was a more than a year process of getting a draft on paper and getting it amended and putting it back in front of people and changing things here and there before we got it in front of the General Assembly here in Arkansas just this past January to get it going in hopes that it would pass.
And so some of the problems that this is fixing are what we've already talked about, but I know that there are other things too. That when we're talking about things like human trafficking, we're talking about stepping around immigration stuff. We're talking about giving women false messages about the legality of their adoption. We're talking about making, not having a proper translator there to help these women understand. And that's, of course, if it's someone who is wasn't born in the United States, someone that's part of a different ethnicity or nationality. But what are some of the things that, outside of those things, or maybe I'm asking you to expand on those issues that this bill is hopefully going to fix or head in that direction?
Yeah. So the bill that passed should stop by criminal sanction the practice of going up to a pregnant woman and offering her cash if that person can either adopt the child or place the child up for adoption, whether they're licensed to do so or not. Mm-hmm. So it turns that conduct into a felony offense in Arkansas. There was some objections to, can I not go and tell her that her expenses would be paid if she decided to place her child up for adoption? Yes, you can still do that. But going up and say, I'll give you cash or I'll buy you a car or something like that's not legal. And then it also expands the definition of human trafficking to say that if you force somebody to place their child up for adoption by any means, whether it's physical or coercive or anything like that, or you participate in the transport, the harboring of a pregnant woman for the sole purpose of placing a child up for adoption, that would be considered human trafficking and punishable as human trafficking. The rest of the bill that we started with was designed to have some systemic fixes. So number one, we had a problem with people from outside of Arkansas, both biological parents and adoptive parents meeting in Arkansas to effectuate adoption. And under those circumstances, Arkansas probably doesn't have jurisdiction to hear the case. And so we wanted some jurisdictional fixes to make sure Arkansas has a legitimate claim to adjudicate this particular adoption. We certainly wanted some procedural changes that would fix those conflicts of interest that we talked about. And so initially we started off by requiring 2 attorneys on the case, where the adoptive parents would pay for an attorney to represent the best interest of the biological parents and ensure that this was a decision that this family had reached in a voluntary way, and that they knew exactly what they were getting themselves into. Ultimately, we had to take that out of there, and we tried to push forward legislation that would require attorneys who work on both sides of the case to be a little bit more robust in how they effectuate the birth parents' consent, and make them go through all these different alternatives for the birth mom, make sure they had a good translator if the birth mother and father didn't speak good English, make sure that this was a free and voluntary choice, that nobody promised them anything, make sure they understand their legal rights. So we certainly need to do something about the conflicts of interest, whether that requires another attorney or it requires a more robust consent. And there are a few other things, trying to, again, make sure that we have translators involved when there's not a good somebody who speaks good English on both sides. Wanted to make sure, we hoped that we would at least get these adoption petitions filed pre-birth, so that a judge would have immediate oversight rather than Monday morning quarterbacking the process from the bench, and when somebody has a baby in their hands that they think they're going to go home with, and then leave the judge with the option of either turning a blind eye to obvious legal violations, or tearing another family apart by taking that adopted child away from the adoptive family because the adoption was not done properly. So that ended up not working. We weren't able to do a pre-birth filing. So these are some of the things that we want to go through and fix, these systemic changes that would stop or at least provide some oversight to the fact that some of these abuses were going on. Of course, you can always follow Bob Woodward's advice, follow the money. Well, in these adoptions, it was hard to do so because, number one, the adoption records are sealed, and number two, the way these attorneys were preparing these expense reports, it was just kind of a blanket item that said birth mother expenses, but there was no list of what was paid under that line item in the expense report. And so when we started looking into that and getting accountings from some of these attorneys on behalf of adoptive families, we would see bail bond and gaming systems and birthday parties and all sorts of other stuff that were going to pay for or going to these birth parents that aren't reasonably related to the adoption or to the pregnancy. And so trying to provide a little bit of transparency to how the money flows is another thing that we hope some of our legislative proposals will fix.
Absolutely. And so, I think that now that we know a little bit about what this bill fixes, what it is, what it does, I want to talk about, why it matters, especially to us. The majority of the people listening are going to be adoptive moms. And, it's a really gross thought to say that just morality wouldn't take care of why we care. But sometimes it doesn't, especially when there's misunderstandings or when we don't see the effects or what's going on or how we play a part in this. So what are the answers to some of those questions? Why does it matter for adoptive families, and how can we help? You touched on kind of the obvious one was just the morality of the situation, but not only the morality of the situation, but having to deal with the effects of the immorality of the situation. A colleague of mine talked to one adoptive family, and this person was doing some investigating and trying to get some facts around what was going on. And one of the things that they asked this person was, how do I, as an adoptive mother, tell my child when she's old enough to understand that she may be a victim of human trafficking? Mm-hmm. How do I deal with that? And ultimately, this stuff is all over the internet, and kids. My 5-year-old or 6-year-old daughter knows how to use the internet just about as well as I do, if not better. And so she's gonna get out there one day and see all these stories. How am I going to explain to her that she might have been that victim of human trafficking, or that my son may have been a victim of human trafficking? So these are conversations that we're going to have at some point, and that's a difficult conversation to have. And I'm not exactly sure I have the answer to that question about how we broach that subject or how we answer that question when our children ask us that. And so that might be the more obvious of it. But
I think we also have to understand that it's not just birth mothers that are hurt here. It's also adoptive families that are hurt through these conflicts of interest. Where it has become most pronounced is where an attorney has represented or placed a child up for adoption multiple times for the same biological mother. Something goes wrong in the process because the attorney gets comfortable or is just trying to take care of that biological mother so that they can continue to place her children up for adoption. And in the meantime, adoptive families either, there's one case that's been pretty well publicized in which the attorney didn't even verify that the mother was pregnant. And so this adoptive family went through 7 months of an adoption plan after having tried in vitro fertilization and natural childbirth, all sorts of other things to start a family and failed. They get to 3 days before the due date and they're told, oops, sorry, I didn't verify she was pregnant and there is no baby. After they'd named this child, had fixed the nursery up, had birth, baby showers and all this other stuff, just incredibly painful experience for them. And then that's not to mention the fact that because this is a marketplace now, it's not a means of child welfare, it's turned it into a marketplace. Mm-hmm. Now we've got these agents who are coming in and stealing away, for lack of a better term, these biological mothers from an adoption plan. And so you as an adoptive parent could get into this adoption plan, be in it for months at a time, spend thousands and thousands of dollars, and then the birth mother decide, well, I'm going to go to another attorney and place this child up for adoption to a different family because they can get more money or because some agent is pressuring them to do so that the agent gets more money. And so in all of those cases, it's the adoptive families that are hurt. It's not just the biological parents who experience some of the negative impacts of these immoral actions.
And I think that's something that, you don't even think about going in, because I think that you feel like the system's going to catch you. You feel like the system's going to, and I don't mean catch you like you're doing something wrong. I mean, be there to catch you when something falls apart or when something falls through or something's not right. And when it's part of the system that's wrong, that's a really scary thought. But talk to me about the message that it sends to these birth moms when it seems like we as adoptive parents don't care.
Yeah. I think part of it, a lot of times adoptive families are so excited about the chance and the prospect of adopting a child that they're blinded to some of these other things, that they just don't see it because they don't want to see it. And I've had adoptive parents tell me that. They said, I was just blinded by the fact that I was going to finally get to have a family and finally get to have a child, that the red flags that did pop up, I kind of dismissed them as, oh, well, it's probably nothing. I did that. And so ultimately the message that it sends, that may not be the message that we intend to send, that we just don't care about these things happening, but that may be the message that the biological parents hear. And as a result, it puts them in a situation where their own self-esteem goes down, that the value of human life can be measured monetarily when we know it's far more valuable than anything money could ever purchase. Mm-hmm. And then they turn into this situation, they get into this situation where they're so dependent on receiving these payments. I mean, adoptive families go into an adoption a lot of time expecting to spend $40,000 or $50,000. And so when it's $30,000, it sounds great, but of that $30,000, $15,000, $18,000 of it goes to these biological women. That's enough to pull them unilaterally out of the federal poverty line. They would no longer qualify for state benefits at that point, based on how much money they're receiving from an adoption. So they get stuck in that cycle of continually getting pregnant and placing a child up for adoption, and even sometimes learn that this is an acceptable and a reasonable way to earn a living, is just getting pregnant and placing children up for adoption. And so when we aren't paying attention as adoptive parents to those situations, that's the kind of message it sends, and that's the kind of the impact that it ultimately has.
Yeah, and I mean that's not stuff that we want to play with, especially as believers. Mm-hmm. We want to send. I know that not everyone listening is a believer, but as a believer myself, like that's something that I would never want to portray to anyone. Honestly, just that I don't value their life, only what they can do for me, or that I don't care if they're being mistreated as long as I benefit. That's really gross to think about. Yeah. So, we've talked about, before we get into these closing questions, we've talked about this bill and we've talked about what it's doing for Arkansas, but what are the changes that you see our entire country heading toward? And I know that this bill has been seen by many as a step in the right direction for the entire country. And I know that this isn't, isolated to just Arkansas. There's stuff like this happening elsewhere. But what if you could do some projection for us, where do you see adoptions headed because of these legal issues?
Well, I think because of the lack of ethical standards across the adoption community nationwide, we're starting to see adoption just become less and less of an alternative. And the number of kids in foster care continue to rise. The number of adoptions continue to fall. And there was actually an article written by a social worker in a national journal where they did some research and come to find out the reason why prospective adoptive parents are saying, no, we've changed our mind, we're not going to do this, is because they don't feel like an adoption can be ethically done anymore, that there's just no ethical way to do it. And so without substantial and substantive and procedural changes to how we do adoptions in the United States, where we send it back to being a means of child welfare rather than as a marketplace, until we see that, if we don't see that, I'm afraid what we're going to see is adoption continue to dwindle until we have even more of a child welfare crisis than we have right now. But I'm hopeful that Arkansas is kind of setting the tone and setting the bar for some other states. I'm hoping that some other states will see what Arkansas does and start moving in the same direction, and that as adoption practitioners, both as attorneys and social workers and agencies and anybody involved in that process, that we'll get to a point to where we can say, here are some minimum practices, standards of practice that we're going to make our ethical norms, and that if you're not going to follow those, then you're not going to practice in this area. And you're not going to do adoptions, you're not going to facilitate adoptions. We've got to see that happen, and I'm hoping that that's what ultimately, from a national perspective, this legislation will bring about.
Yeah, and I mean all of that sounds really great, and I think that as adoptive parents, the ones of us listening, I want to encourage you guys to do your research and to support. If you're not in Arkansas, which I know many of you are not. But just support efforts like this. Support taking care of our children's birth mothers. Like, that is so incredibly important. And for us to imply to our children that such a pivotal part of who they are doesn't matter is so destructive. And I know that Josh, you would agree with that too. And that's part of why you champion for birth moms as an adoptive father. So, on that note, can we get into some of these closing questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what do you wish you had known at the beginning of this journey?
So as an adoptive father, I wish I had known, especially when we talk about the fact that, my family is multinational at this point, that there would be racial issues involved. I kind of naively at the time thought, well, nobody will care. My children will be too young to understand, and nobody's really going to care in this day and age that my children aren't white. Both of those turned out to not be true. I think our daughter was 4 when she first asked, why is my skin brown and yours white? And started asking some very deep and precocious questions about racial issues for a 4-year-old. And so those were things that we had to navigate, but then also just even a little bit of bias within our own family, that this child is a different ethnicity, and not anything that was overt, but just some statements here and there that would suggest a racial bias that I wasn't really expecting. And so I wish I'd have known beforehand that those racial issues would come up and that we'd have to deal with them. And I wish I would have dealt with them beforehand rather than afterwards. So yeah,
just the proactive versus reactive. And that's so hard as adoptive parents. I've talked to lots of adoptive moms who have children that are a different ethnicity than them, and they just, the resounding common is that we just don't know what to do until it's already happened. And then, so definitely just doing that research and talking to people and figuring out how to handle it. And, my next question is, what do you wish you had done differently? And I know that those two kind of go together, but do you have a different answer for that?
Sure. Yeah. So I wish I would have done some more contextual research. I mean, there's so many different avenues to adopt. And again, I was so excited about adopting a child and had had a heart for adoption for so long that, it was kind of, okay, we're going to adopt a child. And that was kind of the end of the inquiry. I think had I gotten into the weeds a little bit more and started researching adoptions in this one small insular community in Northwest Arkansas, it wouldn't have taken much for me to find some news stories already circulating at that time, mainly out of Hawaii, but even out of some other states and maybe a couple here, even in Arkansas. Would have found some stories that would have given me pause in continuing with that particular adoption plan. So, wish I'd have done a little bit more research before I got into it.
For sure. So, what is your favorite way that your people supported you through your adoption journey?
What supported me the most was when people treated me no different than they would have treated me had these children been biological. When people, we brought a child home from the hospital and there were a week's worth of meals planned for us, and there being baby showers and just treating it no differently. I think that was the biggest area of support, especially in light of some of the racial things that we ended up coming to had to deal with by day 2 of our kids' lives. And so, treating it as nothing different was a big means of support for us.
Love that. And I love how that's such a good umbrella, just to, all the things that you would do for a so-called normal baby, you would do for an adoption. I love that.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is always, how have you felt hurt or misunderstood by your people through this process?
Well, those instances in which it wasn't treated just like a normal kid. Those instances in which, there was even active opposition to us going into an adoption plan, that, statements that this child would be abnormal, or that this child would have difficulties that we couldn't handle, or that this child wouldn't be accepted in the community, or you're going to get those weird looks when you're with a child that doesn't look anything like you. Those types of things certainly were part of the misunderstanding I think that a lot of people had, and it got to that lack of support that in and of itself can be hurtful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so if you sum it all up, what is your greatest piece of advice or encouragement to adoptive moms, really, to have different feelings or to have a different regard for their birth moms?
Yeah. So a couple of things. Number one, trust your gut. There are those times in which there seem to be red flags. Don't necessarily just automatically dismiss those as probably nothings. So trust your gut on that. And then if you're going to adopt through an agency or through a private attorney, just make sure your birth mother has a voice. Make sure she's being listened to. Make sure she understands she has a choice. We don't want to get so attached before birth to the idea of adopting this child that we disregard her voice, or we get angry when she uses that voice to make a choice that we would disagree with, that she wants to parent the child and we don't want her to, and we're going to ignore that. So, ultimately there are tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of kids that are available for adoption right here in the United States right now. And if this one doesn't work, if this birth mom makes that decision, very difficult decision, to continue to parent this child rather than place this child up for adoption, we need to make sure she's got a voice in that regard and has a choice. So, ask your attorney, ask your agency about whether they have, private attorneys available for them that are separate from the agency, that are separate from your attorney, and that somebody's actually looking out for her best interest and not just trying to make sure that this adoption succeeds.
Yes. Oh, good stuff, Josh. And so where can we follow along with your activism and with your, your efforts to rectify some of the situations we've gotten ourselves into, social media or blog or, whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can certainly find me on Facebook. I've got a page set up on Facebook. It's, I think, facebook.com/Josh Bryant page. So yeah, you could go there. I'm certainly posting about adoption there pretty frequently. My website is josh-bryant.com. So josh-bryant.com. You can go there. There's always some adoption stuff on there. Things have kind of died down for a little bit, but they won't rest for long. We'll be in interim study here pretty quick, and there's going to be a lot of conversations being had about how we fix some of the problems that we're seeing here in Arkansas. And we'll be in Little Rock probably 6 or 8 times over the next couple of years trying to get that legislation prepared so that when the next General Assembly rolls around in 2021, that we'll have a bill that everybody can support and get behind quickly and pass that fix those systemic issues. So we'll be posting about that pretty frequently, both on the website and on Facebook and all that stuff. So definitely good places to follow what's going on.
Well, good stuff. And you guys, I will have links to all of those things on the show notes. But thank you so much, Josh, for joining us and for educating us on such an important issue.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. So like I said, that was some really hard stuff, but I think that we as adoptive families and support systems, we need to know these things and we need to do our part to prevent them from continuing. And that kind of tees up for my next interview. So I'm really excited about it. It's with my mom, Andrea McCurdy, and Michaela Monty from Shared Beginnings. So Mom and Michaela are no rookies to the podcast. They each have their own episode back in season 1, but since their episodes, they've actually partnered up to launch Shared Beginnings, which is a nonprofit whose goal is to support birth moms with legal help, life skills help, and more. I love both of their hearts for this issue, and both of them have different reasons behind their motivation for this initiative, and I can't wait for you guys to hear all about it. And so this is Shared Beginnings has kind of happened since we've last talked to you guys on the podcast. And so it's been quick, but you guys have done a lot in a really short amount of time. And I think that that's really awesome. But before we get into that stuff, tell us what Shared Beginnings is.
Sure. So Shared Beginnings exists to protect, serve, and support expectant moms that are seeking to make an adoption plan for their child or children.
And so as two non-birth moms, this is really interesting that you both kind of got into this. Michelle, you're an adoptive mom, and Mom, you're not an adoptive mom. You're just like a regular mom. But you guys both have such a heart for this. What were the things that you saw going on in our world that made you want to do something like this?
Sure. So Shared Beginnings primarily serves expectant moms in the Northwest Arkansas area. And Andrea and I did a little bit of legwork and research and found out that there are over 400 private adoptions just in our 2 counties up here in Northwest Arkansas per year. And most of those 400 adoptions, the expectant moms don't receive a lot of support, social services connections. Really, what we're finding, most of our clients now, this is not their first adoption plan. So no one took the time to pour into them and get them to a stable point in life so that this wasn't where they ran to when they came to in a crisis situation. So, personally, I have 3 adopted kids. 2 of them were private adoptions, and we realized just through the first one that our birth mom hadn't gotten any access to medical care. She hadn't gotten connected to other social services. She really just wasn't at a better spot in life than when she had come to the decision to make an adoption plan. So the second time around, I essentially acted as her advocate, took her to those healthcare appointments, got her set up with some other social services locally, and she hasn't had to make an adoption plan since then. And that's the purpose of Shared Beginnings, is helping get these expectant moms and their families to a point of stability.
Definitely. And so what about you? I mean, I feel like you're more of the wild card just because you're not an adoptive mom, and you've been present through our story, definitely. Right. But it's been really cool to see this because Michaela, you were my friend, and obviously you're my mom, and you two did not know each other. And I feel some pride that I connected you guys, but it cracks me up because I'm like, my friend and my mom are working together and now they have a nonprofit And it just is like, it's not for adoption. I mean, it is for adoption, but it's just really cool how God works. But I want to know why this has been important for you.
Well, I think watching y'all go through your story with adoption, and also just professionally, I get calls probably 3 or 4 a week of single parents that are pregnant, wondering what choice to make and how to make that choice. And so I represent a lot of parents placing their kids for private adoptions. And the more I started meeting with other agencies in the area, and talking to Michaela as well, we realized that's kind of the gap. That's the legal gap as well, is that we have a lot of birth mothers that aren't legally represented. So they don't have the social support like Michaela was talking about, but they also don't have the legal support. They don't know their rights and their options. They don't have legal representation to keep them safe through the process, to protect them. And then I just also have a heart for younger people that may be college students or even high school students that, may find themselves pregnant and not even know where to turn. And we want to get our name out there, that we can support them, help educate them, help, like Michaela said, get them to a better place in life, and help them because they're making the brave choice to place their child for adoption. And we want to support them through that.
Definitely. And I wanted to ask you about this because I think that, this kind of started with you back when, I remember it was winter of last year. So currently this is October that we're recording this, and you just felt this pull away from what you had been doing in your law practice, which was primarily custody cases and just family law. And that was really dragging you down and burning you out. And you felt this pull toward adoption in some way. And that connection with Michaela, it's like it just spiraled from there in a good way, not a bad way, not a bad spiral. But what was that like when you two,
Tasmanian devil spiral,
right? But when you two connected and you both realized that what you were feeling complacent in what you were doing, and you felt God pulling you to something else. How did you guys figure out that God was pulling you together to do it?
It was kind of crazy because I like you said, I really felt God pulling me toward that, and just. Something that my heart was all in for, but I had no idea where to start. And, started talking to several different people, then some agencies. Michaela, said she was feeling the same thing. And then we met with, certain agencies. I remember the day in my office that after going through several meetings, I said, this is the gap. It is the birth mothers. If we want to protect this adoption process, it's the birth mothers that are not protected right now. And then we have shared beginnings.
Yeah. Similar to what Andrea said. At the time last year, I was working for Walmart corporate headquarters, and for a long time, my goal in life was to affect their adoption benefits policy. And so I had just planned a big adoption awareness event in November, and that's kind of when Andrea and I started talking. And then come January, they announced the benefits policy changes, and they called me and asked if I would represent kind of the Walmart adoption family on the local news. And so that was extremely cool, but it was sort of that feeling, okay, like what's next? Like, what now? Like, I reached this monumental goal in life that I felt like was potentially not attainable. And then it was like, now what? Because I've always felt that pull towards championing adoption. But then kind of like Andrea said, through our discussions with other agencies and attorneys and crisis pregnancy centers, we just came to this conclusion, and things started clicking that it's, like she said, it's the expectant moms that really are being done, kind of a disservice throughout this process.
All right, guys, sorry to interrupt, but I'm so excited to keep talking about my sponsor for this episode. So Little Box of Decorations helped me out so much with my daughter's party. She is like girly girl to the max, and she had to have a mermaid/unicorn party. Their mission is like planning and decorating small events can be stressful, tiring, and time consuming. Little Box of Decorations is here to save your party day. LBD provides all-in-one kits that include everything you need for your party, including table settings, decorations, and invitations, all delivered to your doorstep. There are curated kits available, or, like me, they can work with you to design any custom party. No more running around town or stressing out about coordinating details or hoping your colors match or any of that. So you want to check out their website at littleboxofdecorations.co or follow them on Instagram at lbdecorations for all of your party needs. LBD is all of the party and none of the hassle. They are great and easy to work with, and they won't even make fun of you when you come at them with a crazy idea like mermaid unicorn party. You guys are definitely going to want to check them out.
Sarah Avery, who had a podcast in season 1, came and started talking to us about what she saw lacking in the process on her side as a birth mom. And then I went to an event and heard another birth mom speak, and was that really weird person that went up to her afterwards and was like, I really need to talk to you. You need to come to our birth mom brunch. And then we had someone just bravely show up at birth mom brunch. And so, and then we had another podcaster, Lana and Rachel did an episode earlier. And so those 4 ladies really kind of came together and are sort of our core group that we bounce ideas off of, that we talk to. Once we really have things up and running, they'd love to see just a support group started for birth moms in general, no matter how far you are out from placement or if you're coming up to placement. And so I'm really excited to get that launched and off the ground too.
I think that's really cool. And I wanted to highlight that because you guys are not just, you're not just shooting out into nowhere and hoping it works. You're actually, they're not even really your official board members, but you still have this separate group that you're saying, is this effective? Does this mean anything? Is this worth our efforts? Is this actually helping? And I think you guys, you could have been looking at this strictly from a business standpoint. You could have been just trying to push the papers and sign the documents and get this done. And that's the big problem that you guys have seen, right? And instead, you're doing your due diligence and you're making sure that what you're doing matters.
Well, and it is a social thing. I mean, when you're talking about birth moms, you're talking about some stress and emotions and all those things that go into a pregnancy and making that difficult choice. So the people that we have to kind of like Sarah Avery and Lana, and I mean, you've got these people who have been there and have such a heart for it. We know that we could call them at any time and they would come and help. They would come and counsel a birth mom. They would come and give us advice because they've been there and they realize how it is. And it can't just be pushing paper and pushing it through legally or medically or anything like that. It has to you've got to have the compassion and the heart. And so God has really put these people in our circle that we know have that heart, have that same heart, and are willing to do whatever needs to be done to help somebody, personally, and give them the compassion and the care and just sometimes just listening.
I love that. So before we move on to just what you guys are actually tangibly doing and how people can help, I want to hear from each of you, what has been your favorite kind of wow moment, like this, where you just sit there and you're saying like, this is awesome. This is what we're doing.
Gosh, I can think of like 4 or 5. I know that at one point, not too long ago, I had a client and I was talking to her kind of about shared beginnings, and we were at the courthouse. We were just waiting for something totally unrelated, and we had a Marshallese birth mother at the time with shared beginnings, and then she said, well, I really have a heart for the Marshallese people, the Marshallese community. And I remember looking up and thinking, really, God, I just did not expect to find that here, and God she was really instrumental in putting some things together, and I think will be in the future. I think God is just one of those examples that I think God he just has all these hearts prepared and he's putting it all together. I can think of 3 or 4 more. I'll let Michaela talk. But
I was going to say, I think one of yours would probably be our first birth when you got to be there at the hospital.
Yeah.
And experience all of that. Because I've experienced it from the other side, but
that was really cool too. And I got to actually take a picture, with the birth mother handing the adoptive parents the baby, and take a picture of them together. And that was really cool. You're right. That was a big wow moment.
Yeah.
What about you, Michaela?
So I think that, like Andrea said, there's been so many, but I mean, God has specifically put a couple people that have been really instrumental in helping us build this. One of them is JD Ann, our bilingual translator and care coordinator, and she has just been awesome. Like, she's our full-time volunteer who helps transport clients, who helps fill out Medicaid applications, and she was just like a friend of a friend, and started by helping us with our first client, and then has just like stuck around. And I think that she's probably a self-proclaimed shared beginnings lifer, but which we'll take if she wants to do that. But she's been fantastic. Our board members, every time one of them says yes, it's just like crazy. Yeah, like the way that God puts those people in your path. Like, our most recent board member is an adoptive mom herself, is a certified mediator. She's been a CASA advocate. She acted as an advocate for her own birth mom. She just totally gets this. And this was, 17 plus years ago. And she was like, I'm so glad you guys are establishing this. Like, this has been a need for so long. But it's just, it's amazing every time you have one of those experiences.
It really is. It's been a wild ride already.
That's really cool. I know I keep saying that's really cool, but it's just been really, like I said, it's been neat to watch this unfold and see where you guys are now. And I know that, every time I've said you guys have gotten so much accomplished or everything, you're both like shaking your head over there like you haven't done anything yet, which is insane because you've done so much. But I know that it might not seem like that from your point of view. So what are some of the things, like, where are you right now? What are some of the programs and practices that you guys do have in place? And then where are you wanting to see yourself when you officially launch?
So, I would say logistically where we're at is everyone is just full-time volunteers. We just received our 501c3 status at the end of last week, we filed for that in April, and it is now October. So we got it in the end of September, but that was an excruciating wait. This week we have the child welfare licensure. People are coming to visit our office and talk to us. So that's the next hurdle for us. We feel like that's a necessary one just to make sure that everyone, including the court systems, adoptive parents, expectant moms, all understand that we're doing this as above board with the most transparency possible. Mm-hmm. So we will have that kind of extra level of credentials, I guess. We have started networking with vendors, but like soon we'll launch our kind of a capital giving campaign. And I know no one really loves that term, but it is necessary. It's just like any other startup where there is like a certain level of investment that's needed. But we're always looking for connections that people could provide personal hygiene items or detergent or larger size diapers, advocate volunteers. If you are a stay-at-home mom or someone with some additional flexibility in your schedule and you have compassion for moms who find themselves in these types of situations, like, come on, we can use you. We use advocates to take our clients to doctor's appointments and get their driver's licenses and apply for WIC and all of the things. So yeah, volunteers, giving, resources, like
we're fixing to need office supplies.
Yeah.
And, things like that, desks. I mean, there's just so many things that we need to put in place, but God's provided everything that we need so far. It's been incredible to see even tangible things like that. But
yeah, we had to get a storage unit. I paid for a storage unit today because my garage is bursting at the seams,
which is amazing.
So what I'm going to have them do for the show notes is provide me with a list of just some immediate needs, some things that are ongoing that, those boxes can't ever really be checked, that you're going to continue to need. Yeah. And I'll have that in the show notes at theadoptivemompodcast.com for you guys to be able to help out if you're able. But, so, I mean, that's more on like the tangible, relationship wise. But what about on the legal end? What are some of the things that you guys have in place now? And where do you see yourself going? And what do you need to get there?
On the legal side?
Yeah.
We are, most of, on the legal side, we need reimbursement, case management systems, I guess. Mm-hmm. It would be the most important thing, which we have to develop for this whole, all of Shared Beginnings. It'll all be connected. Really, legally, it's just, forms and things like that I take care of. There's nothing really that we need to acquire. It's just, it'll be nice when we hopefully do get approved as a child placement agency and everything can go under one umbrella and instead of having to have everything legally through my office. But right now, that's the smooth part. It's getting everything up to that point, taking care of it legally. That's the hardest work.
Yeah, well, and I know that that combination of making sure that you're above board legally and above board, socially, I don't know what else, how else you would say it, but I know that those two things, marrying and staying consistent, has not been easy, especially because the other services in our area have not always been above board. And so I know for you, that was one of your initial goals, right? To make sure that you had a practice in place legally to, that where the money was being, handled correctly.
Right. And, administratively, that's the big thing right now, is, getting a system in place where it's under, once we're approved and it can all be under one umbrella. The reimbursements, we want to do special reports that we've prepared, for the court for every adoption that just show the transparency of expense reimbursement. The other side legally is when we have birth mothers that are birth fathers too. That are, they're making the choice to place their baby for adoption because it's the best interest of their child at their station in life right now. But part of that may be that they have other legal problems that are unresolved. Mm-hmm. And that's part of, our goal too, is we want to take care of any outstanding warrants. There are so many people that have outstanding warrants that have no idea. They just forgot to pay a parking ticket one year, or something like that. So we want to take care of all of that. We, at the end of this process for them with this child that they're placing for adoption, we want them to be ready to go out and do what God has in store for them after this and be in a better station in life at that time.
Right. You want them to leave the hospital not feeling forgotten or abandoned, but feeling empowered, right? Because
empowered is
I think
a good
that's
right.
been the situation.
Right.
Yeah. I say adoption is the process, but empowerment is our goal.
That's exactly right.
I like that.
Yep.
It's a good quote, Miss Michaela. Well, you guys, okay, so where can people find you guys individually and Shared Beginnings?
So we are on Facebook. I guess I'm a bit of a super old social media soul, so that's the only channel we're currently on. We do have a website, sharedbeginnings.org, that you can find us at and reach out that way. But willing to accept any help, like happy to sit down with people and talk to them about their gifts and their strengths and just see where we can plug people in at. Andrea mentioned the case management system. So we'll be working to build out all of those forms in there and making sure it's accessible to advocates and our care coordinators. So there's a plethora of things to get done.
Yes. My office number is 479-439-8881. And anybody can call with any questions at all. We're using my office right now to operate out of.
It's your headquarters.
Yes, our headquarters, yes. And so anybody that has any questions, I would love to sit down and explain more about what we do and how maybe God's calling them to help.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited you guys sat down with me. Like I said, you're like VIPs of the podcast now, and it's always fun to chat with you guys. And it's been fun to chat with you together because it's like, brought this union to, I don't know, just being silly now. But thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I hope you found encouragement here. I need you to know that you are enough and you're doing a great job. We are all in this together, and I am over here cheering you on. Don't forget to check out show notes for this episode and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks for joining us.